I'm here with Karan Nijawan, and he is the founder of JUBE, which helps companies build better relationships with their employees. And Karan, thank you so much for being here. This is awesome to have you.
Matt, so excited to be here. So glad you reached out to me, and
Yeah.
can't wait to dive into this.
Yeah, me too. And so I thought, yeah, you're at a really exciting place in your company. So I thought that your story into entrepreneurship and your how you got into it in the first place, and then what this first year of your company has been like, would be a great place to start. So if you could just tell us, yeah, how you got into entrepreneurship and then this company in particular, and what this first year has been like for you.
Amazing, man. We were just talking briefly, me and you, and I said, hey, man, like I'm just coming up on the 1 year anniversary, and there's so much gratitude, so much to think about, but it also like so much more I have to go. And anyways, let me, just for those watching, let me give you just some context as to who you're listening to today and why it could be of value to you. I grew up in a very small city, very small province, Newfoundland, East Coast Canada, where the population was 500,000 people. The city's population is like 110,000 people, not a big place. And at the time, a couple of years ago when I lived there, I found that networking and relationship building, and there's no real groups or opportunities to actually build real relationships with people. You had your standard networking events, you had your organizations, you had your clubs. And those meetings, for me at least, were always filled with like, you had to put on your best face, you had to have like a suit and jacket on, you had to have the perfect smile, the perfect shave. Like, it wasn't truly like real people, in my opinion. And I found that every event I was going to ended up with me collecting a lot of business cards, me being pitched about, call me when you need insurance, call me when you need a lawyer, call me when you need this. And I would leave every single event with a bunch of business cards and not one friend. Right. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but when you're being pitched 24/7 at one of these events, you start to realize that, hey, am I the fool? Like, am I the one that's going to the wrong events? So what I did was I just started hosting my own dinners. I read a book called Mastermind Dinners, and I started hosting my own dinners where I could hand pick people that I wanted to get to know deeper. Selfishly, I picked entrepreneurs and business owners because I thought, hey, if I surround myself with really smart people, I'm going to level up naturally. So I would invite people in the city, business owners, people that had, some level of street cred or public authority. I would invite them to dinners and said, hey, I'm hosting this dinner with a group of entrepreneurs. There's no business cards allowed. You don't have to wear a suit, and no handshakes, hugs only. Like, that's the culture I was trying to create, like very heavy. And I thought all the conversations at the dinners were going to be about like scale and marketing and how to grow your business, how to pivot, and like all that sexy stuff that we think about when we say the word entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, I realized that the conversations just got to this level of depth that I think humans crave. We started talking about being vulnerable. We started talking about mental health issues, about depression, about suicide, about anxiety, about relationships with your family, relationships with your employees, relationships with your dad who you haven't spoke to 6 months. We talked about how your health has gotten out of control because you're working 24/7. Real conversations. And that was a breath of fresh air coming from events where I felt like it was very transactional. Mm-hmm. So I thought there was something powerful to these dinners. And I would do one dinner every month, and always floating new people in and out. And 6 months into doing dinners in a place like St. John's, which was very small, like I had to quote like this lineup of people that wanted to come to dinner, and thinking like a business owner, even though I wasn't, I was like, I wonder if I can monetize this. I mean, naturally, when your idea starts to pick up traction, you're like, how do I monetize this? So I offered a very, inexpensive monthly membership to this community that I had called Level Up. And I had a group of entrepreneurs sign up that were paying $100 a month to be a part of this club. And all we would do is every month we would host dinners, and we would get together and like have real talk. Where do you need the most support right now? What's going on at home? You don't have to pretend like business is like amazing. Like, trust us. Like, we're all in the same journey together. So let's come together and actually create this community /tribe/family that we can leverage each other and fuel our own individual lives forward because we're doing it collectively. And that was my introduction into like operating my own business. Mm-hmm. And then when I came to Toronto 3 years ago today, this is, a city of 3 million people. And I thought to myself, oh my God, it's gonna be so easy to make friends here. And it was just as bad. It was actually 10 times worse, right? Yeah. The events are bigger. The spaces are bigger. It's like St. John's times a million.
As someone who's from Toronto, I've heard this from everybody who comes here who's not from here, because I almost, and I'm not complaining, but I almost have too many friends here because it's my hometown. And then everybody who comes is like, how do I make friends here? And it's a rough process from what I gather.
Especially if you're like later in your life. Like I was coming when I was around 27, 28. So I had an established friend group in Newfoundland, but not in Toronto. So coming here again, like being naive, started going to all these local meetup events and like meetup.com and this and that. And again, all the events were still very much transactional. It was almost like you knew you were going to get pitched, but you're going to go anyways, just hoping like, hey, I hope this event is different.
Yeah.
So naturally, I just started doing dinners in Toronto as well. And one dinner a month turned into sometimes 4 dinners a month. And I was doing it rapidly to build my network in the city, where I would just invite entrepreneurs and business owners. And I would say, hey, bring a friend that I may not know. And started creating my own community of entrepreneurs in Toronto. And then a year ago, when I left my 9-to-5, was really the birth or the inspiration of my company, which is called JUBE, which stands for Just Be. And when I left my 9-to-5, I leaned on all of these people that I had hosted dinners for. I leaned on those relationships and I said, hey, I'm about to start a business. I have no idea what it's going to look like. I don't know what I'm going to sell you. I don't know what it's going to cost, but are you in? Are you in?
Yeah.
And after, investing in these relationships, I had 10 people be like, dude, whatever you're doing, I want to be a part of it. I'm in. You're going to figure it out. And
you had built up a level of trust with them that they knew you weren't going to oversell them something. You weren't going to sell them something that was nonsensical or not worthwhile. So you had that kind of those true fans, as they say,
I had nothing to sell. I didn't have a product. I didn't have a defined service. Like I had no idea.
Yeah.
All I knew was that I was at a point in my 9-to-5 where I couldn't bear it any longer. Right. It got to the point where it was just, I wasn't motivated. I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. And you often hear about these things in like books and stories, but like truly, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, oh my God, I hate Monday mornings, like literally. And I hate my manager because they don't value me, or there's no growth opportunity at this company, or nobody even knows me. Like what am I doing here? And like, in today, 2020, I would say 60% of people at a 9-to-5 probably have a side hustle that they're motivated by, right? They have some sort of passion project. So for me, I always had these passion projects while I was in 9-to-5s. One of my old managers actually called me a flight risk when I first started at the company. He's like, dude, I know you. You're probably only going to be
gone.
here.
Yeah.
You're going to be gone soon. He literally called me a flight risk to my face.
Right.
I ended up being there for 5 years, but nonetheless. So for me, Will, it was that I had only invested in curating this amazing experience for my dinner guests, where they knew that any room they would step into with me would be no business cards, no pitching, and real talk. So I was able to create the relationships with people where they knew it was going to be anything but transactional.
Right. So that's a really key point, because, obviously in many businesses, but entrepreneurship especially, it's so transactional when you meet somebody, because it's like, how, we feel that there's this limited time. And, in the days where we used to get together in person and go to networking events, there was always this sense of, okay, how do I maximize my time here? That means if you do the math, you have to have like a maximum number of minutes with each individual. I personally always hated that, because if I found someone interesting, I wanted to stay with them and get stuck in and talk about whatever it is that I found interesting about them or that we shared. But, there's this sense of, okay, I'm doing my company a disservice if I'm not bouncing around like a social butterfly and talking to all these different people. So the interesting thing about what you're saying, though, is that you started this company not for money, not because you're like, I want to make money. You started because you had this deep, like, human need for something, and you decided to create it for yourself in a space that doesn't exist. And I think that's a lot of entrepreneur wisdom says that, is like, don't try to just make money, because that is backwards thinking. But it seems like you really started something because of a deep emotional need that you had, and then figured out how to monetize it later. And you also demonstrated to the people that you were creating it for, this is not about money. This is about solving this problem. Can you? Yeah.
So, man, you just nailed so many great points. The first one is this was a quality play, not a quantity play. It wasn't about how many contacts can I build.
Yeah.
I'm new to the city. How many new people can I add to my CRM? Like in my Rolodex, we always hear this word Rolodex. Like it had nothing to do with quantity. It was always based on quality. And Dinners for me, I've always said this, dinners have had nothing to do with the food and they've had nothing to do with the restaurant.
Mm.
You're like, dude, what are you talking about? You've hosted like 100 plus dinners. I know, but they've never had anything to do with the physical environment. It had everything to do with the depth of the conversations that happens at that table.
Right.
Many people refer to these dinners as their version of therapy, right? It was a place where you could come, you might not know anyone, but within the first question where I ask you, Will, what keeps you up at night?
Mm.
And right away you have to be vulnerable in front of 10 strangers. You're like, oh my God, this shit's the real deal.
Yeah.
Like there's none of this like, hey, how many email subscribers? What's your MRR month over month? Like,
yeah.
Oh my God, get me out of those rooms, quite frankly. For me, it's like, what has become more important in your life? What are the values that you want to teach your future children? Like real talk that can fuel my personal life forward. Because I know when I fuel my personal life forward, my business does way better. But when I'm focused on the business and the money, then I'm so wrapped up in that world that shit never happens, right? It never comes up. But when I step away and actually just work on myself, that's where you're able to find other opportunities. So for me, the reason these dinners were 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours long, I mean, the food was long gone, right? Yeah. It was the quality of the conversation and people didn't want to leave because they were meeting incredible people that they didn't know. And again, like Toronto is a big city and like you might know a lot of people, but there's still a lot of amazing people out there. So coming to my dinners, you never knew who was going to be there. I never sent out the guest list. I had assigned seating based on intake forms I would send out to people. So if you said, hey, I'm writing a book right now, and I happen to have another friend who either has already written a book, I would purposely seat you guys together just for that like connection and that camaraderie. Yeah. And I would always send follow-up emails and connect everyone the next day. So not only did that dinner impact like one night, but the amount of relationships that came out of a dinner, the amount of business deals that just happened to magically happen after meeting somebody at a dinner, like that's where the real magic is.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I would imagine that those follow-ups would have have such a higher rate of success because once that relationship on a real level has been created, why would you want to work with anyone else unless that person just happens to be terrible at what they do? But like that's really how we all operate. And in business or in life or in love or romance or friendships, we don't really go with people who give us the most or get us the most. We go with the people who make us feel good and we feel connected to, for whatever reason. And so, a big thing I talk about a lot is anxiety. And so the reason I think anxiety it has such a primacy for the entrepreneur to figure out, and why I recommend, as you said, working on yourself first, is that until you understand what makes people really tick, like underneath their desire for like a well-run company or to make a bunch of money, then you can't really speak to what they want and you can't really connect with them. And an evening of the sort that you're talking about, which we all relate to because we've all had that amazing dinner where you stayed and shut down the restaurant or, and you just couldn't get enough of the conversation. It is anxiety reducing to have those talks because the thought of I am alone with all of my fears and my worries, which gets reiterated by social media and this bullshit that we all kind of, put up in front of everyone that we're doing great. And as you said, our business is fine. There's no problems. That is stress causing. It makes us go, oh my God, I'm alone. I am uniquely bad at what I do and everybody else is doing well and I'm not. And then when you have these conversations, this real talk, you just take this huge breath and go, oh, I'm so glad that other people are going through it too. And that's one of the most stress relieving things I can even think of. And I think you found this incredible thing to do for people. And I want to speak a bit more to this point about loneliness because you write about the word loneliness, both I think when you were in Newfoundland and then when you came to Toronto. What were the kind of effects of that loneliness on you? What did it stop you from doing, or what kind of barriers did that loneliness put up for you?
Dude, that is a great question. I think, we often think about relationships being external, your friend, your partner, your parents, your colleagues, your coworkers, your sister. But man, the biggest relationship that sometimes goes overlooked is the one that you have with yourself.
Right.
And it's the person you see in the mirror. It's the person that you see every night. It's the person you see every morning. It's the person that when your jeans feel tight, it's that person. And we're always comparing ourselves to somebody. We're always comparing ourselves to somebody. And one thing that I've realized at these dinners is that we're all the same. Like we all have the exact same problems. We all have the exact same issues. We all have very similar stresses. They just might be positioned differently. They might just have a different wrapping paper on the gift. We all have the exact same problems that keep us up at night. Yours might be greater, or maybe I've already gone through it and you're just about to, or vice versa. But when you create an environment where those conversations that most people avoid become the norm, you start to feel like, wow, there's actually like a tribe out there for me. Or, whoa, I'm not alone. Are you kidding me? Like, how did you know that? And when you're able to share vulnerable stories about your past and your traumatic experiences, and then somebody clicks on the other side of the table with a similar story, and they've been quiet all night, but it just took you that one moment to say, hey, like when I got called chubby in grade 6, did you realize like I never learned how to swim until I was 20 odd years old because of that moment in grade 6?
Yeah.
That's a real example. Like I truly didn't learn how to swim until I was 26 because I got called fat in grade 6. And that just from a psychological and mental perspective, super impacted my life.
For sure.
But when I'm able to share that, and on any level, you're like, oh, like I have kids that get bullied, or, hey, I was bullied as a kid, or, hey, I'm still petrified of the water, right?
Even I bullied a kid when I was that age. That's the other crazy thing as well. Yeah.
There's so much of that happens. And there's a reason why, like, I'm proud when somebody cries at dinner, not from like a look what I did, but from a, wow, this space is so vulnerable that people feel open and honest enough to just let go. And, you know, like sometimes you just need a good release. Like you either need to scream into your pillow, or you need to go on a workout and just like yell, or you need to blast music, or you need to punch your pillow, or you need to just like tell yourself something in the mirror. Whatever that release is for you, like make sure it's safe. For me, my releases have always been these dinners. And dude, I will be the first to say that I love dinners. Leading up to every dinner, I always tell my partner, Brandy, I'm like, oh, I've got another dinner tonight. And she's like, you always say this.
Yeah.
And then you go to the dinner and then you come back and you're like, that was the best dinner ever.
Yeah.
So, but the reason is because like going into dinner, you're about to walk into this vulnerable space times the number of people that are there. Yeah. Right. If I have Will and Mike and Brandy and Becky and Joanne, I'm going to hear 8 to 10 different stories tonight. And once the conversations start to get heavy, it's a lot to take in, right? It's a lot to take in. And there was days where literally, dude, I would do a dinner and for 2 or 3 days, like I wouldn't talk to anyone.
Afterwards.
I just had to process like everything that I heard. So your question was around loneliness. Man, entrepreneurs spend so much time in their own head with themselves behind a laptop on Zoom. Like it's just us. And when you connect with somebody who you feel connected with on a level deeper than just what do you do for a living, insane relationships are able to form.
Yeah. And so those relationships and those deeper relationships, it seems like they become a bit of a fuel for all the things that you want to do suddenly seeming to become possible. And we were talking before this, you were saying that there's this thing that you've learned about, action leading to momentum rather than the other way around. So I was just, I wanted to talk about that because the way loneliness has plagued me in my life is it literally will have a physical effect on my energy level. Like when I feel really lonely, when I'm either holding something in, not talking to my friends or family about it, or when I just feel disconnected from the world, or when I'm physically in another place. I've lived in a couple different places around the world and not had people there that I've known. Like there's a physical toll that takes, and I don't want to get out of bed, and I'm just stuck there, and you feel that like heaviness in your limbs and that just like fatigue feeling like you've, just are recovering from a flu or something. And, that the physical effects on loneliness on the body, and then also on your mind of just going like, well, what is the point where depression comes in, right? Of like, what's the point of doing this? Even if I do it, nothing good's going to happen. I'm not going to succeed. I'm not good enough. I'm not this. And I think the inability to either release that thought vocally, which is of course what therapy is for, or just to hear it from someone else, frees up so much of that and allows that energy to kind of, flip and build you up. So I'd love to hear a bit more about like your relationship to that and what you've learned in this first year about that principle.
Dude, this is like, this couldn't be timed better. I'm coming up, I just kind of surpassed my first year of my business full time. And there's so much I want to talk about from mentally, like this is a tough journey, dude. This, and you're 3 or 4 into your business. Like this is a tough journey, man.
Yeah.
And anyone who signs up for this has to know that. And you could read it in books, but until you live it every single day for like 365 days and you've got your 1-year stamp, man, there's days, like 3 months into my business, I was like, okay, this is not working. I need to close down.
Yeah.
6 months into my business, oh, this is not working. I need to close down. Yeah. 9 months in, okay, this has been a shitty month. Like this is not going to work. The pandemic happens. All my events get canceled. I'm like, cool, business is over. Got to shut down, right? There's so many reasons why I shouldn't have a business or you shouldn't have a business, right? What if it doesn't work out? What if I can't get customers? What if I don't make salary? What if I don't grow? What if I can't sign clients? What if my deal cycle gets longer? What if nobody buys? What if people want refunds? There's all these reasons. And when it comes to action and momentum, dude, I was the king of not taking step 1 because I couldn't see step 3. My type A personality needed step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 mapped out before I was ever willing to take that first step.
Right.
So that prevented me for years of just not wanting to take risks because, hey, what do you mean? I can't see the future, so I'm not going to risk it. Like that doesn't make sense. I was thinking so backwards that I was hoping by like the strike of God, I would be hit with this magical word momentum and it would just come out of nowhere and that would kickstart my journey. It's like when I started losing weight, it's like you had to take the first step. When I started working out, you got to do the first rep. When I started reading books, you start with the first page. When I launched my podcast 3 weeks ago, I started with episode 1. Like you have to start somewhere. And
how difficult the momentum is to start. But then once you do get started, you learn that it's a lot easier. Yeah.
You learn that it's a lot easier because you start getting some quick wins. And some of these quickest wins are often not even monetary or financial, but they're more of like a confidence standpoint. It's like, whoa, I can actually interview this guy. Or, whoa, I can actually host my first dinner. Whoa, somebody actually wants to give me their credit card. Like you start getting these validation tactics and slowly you start getting validated. But I think one of the biggest mistakes I see, even in my circle of entrepreneur friends, is that we have these great ideas and then we talk ourselves out of it because, hey, that won't work because of this, or that won't work, or yeah, that's something I want to do, but I don't know how to do it. And one of the biggest principles in life is like you set a goal and you forget about the how. Like forget about the how. Don't worry how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, who you need, what it looks like. That's not for you to figure out today. For you to figure out today is where do you want to be a year from now, 2 years from now? And even that's sometimes too far away. Where do you want to be 7 days from now?
Right. And and this idea about, I can't do that because it might not work or because it's a bad idea. It's so funny because that actually has never been my problem in my business. It's almost been the other way around. I'm kind of like stupidly optimistic, but I think it's really helped me so far because if I had known what was coming for me or if I had known what I needed to know as an entrepreneur before starting, I never would have started. If somebody had told me, you're going to have to be responsible for every payment that comes in and every payment that goes out and putting the HST that you charge in a separate account and like charging your US clients this and then, getting this together. And, for me, money and all the financial stuff is a nightmare and a headache. I hate it. And if I had really thought through that and what that was going to take, I probably wouldn't have started my business. So, and this is something I've struggled with a lot. And I wonder how you feel about this because you sound a bit more like a planner. Maybe I teach the ocean test. I don't teach it, but I use it in my coaching. The ocean test being the big 5 models of personality traits, which are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and nervousness. So those are said to be the big 5 traits of human personality, kind of across cultures and across times. And conscientiousness is the ability to plan and to be self-disciplined and to be organized. I scored in the bottom 2 percentile of conscientiousness. And it seems like you're a bit higher on that. But what I also scored high on is extroversion and openness, which is kind of like, hey, why not? Like, let's just do it and see what happens, which I think has served me well. So can you speak a bit to that? On what kind of a personality do you think, how does your personality show up in your business? What parts have helped you and what parts have maybe hindered you?
I think the parts that have hindered me in the past were this notion of having the entire roadmap mapped out before I was able to launch or execute or actually plan a project. that hindered me for years, dude. I stayed at jobs too long. I stayed in relationships too long. Like, there's always reasons where, when you get comfortable, you don't want to leave, because any bit of discomfort causes friction, and we don't like friction. That's just not in our behavior. So I would say from last year to now, I would say, that was current 1.0 to current 2.0 now. The biggest thing that I've learned this year, and man, I've radically shifted from being the guy who needed all these steps. Now my philosophy is say yes and figure it out later.
Yeah.
Right. Last week, I got a contract with this company where I said, yeah, I'm going to give you this, this, and this. They're like, great. Now I'm going to go create it.
Yeah.
The old me would have been like, oh, I don't have that ready. I don't have those templates. I don't have these scripts. Like, I don't have that thing. And now it's just a matter of add value wherever you can, show up for the other person, help them get a win, promise them what you can actually deliver, get the agreement or get the deal, and then go figure it out later.
Yeah.
I didn't know 3 weeks ago how to launch a podcast, but I said, hey, let me record my first episode and figure it out. And what's happened? Now we're 3 weeks in. It's on iTunes. It's on Spotify. I'm on episode 8. Like, things just fall in place because you agree to the initial thing and you figure out the rest later. Last year, I would have said, well, how do I need to submit on Spotify? How do I need to submit on iTunes? What's the approval process? How long is it going to take? Should I have an intro? Should I have an outro? What's the graphic? Like, I would have had all these things ready in place before the first episode would have ever been filmed. Now what I did was I filmed the first 6, and then I figured out those little pieces later. So like, the biggest difference, I think, is just, and when you have momentum, it's like a snowball, right? It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But when that snowball hits a rock, or when that snowball melts, the hardest thing to do is get back up and start rebuilding a new snowball. And what I realize is that every day is not good or bad. Every day is just progress from the day before. For me anyways, that's how I view like day-to-day steps. I look at it as like this idea of the snowball effect. I don't know if anybody's, not to get political here, but Robert Reich, who wrote and made the film Inequality for All, has this concept of the vicious cycle of poverty and then the virtuous cycle of a good economy. So the idea is that, if there's not enough money in the economy, then people don't buy and businesses close down and then jobs get lost, and then it's this vicious cycle. But then if you put money into the economy, then people spend and more jobs get created, blah, blah, blah. So that's the sort of economic model of it. But I think about the idea of the virtuous cycle and the vicious cycle psychologically as well. If you believe that you can't do something, your energy levels will be lower. They'll have that physical, detrimental effect that we were talking about earlier. You won't get out of bed. You won't have the confidence to say yes to that thing. And then you get fewer wins, and your thought that you suck is right and gets validated, and then it continues. However, if you just go, okay, I'm going to do this thing. If it blows up in my face, that's fine. It's a learning experience, but I'm just going to do it and see what happens. And of course, there's nothing like a deadline. So if somebody goes, hey, by the way, on July 17th, we're doing that thing, remember? So you go, okay, well, I guess I got to make my slide deck, and I got to prepare the materials and get a bio and a headshot, and all those things that you wouldn't do without a deadline are suddenly on the table. So I think what's so important is creating that virtuous cycle of self-confidence with also self-acceptance. You're not going to get everything done. You're not going to respond to everything. One thing that's really tough for me right now is I don't have the capacity to say yes to everything, which is a great problem to have, but I can't. There's so many great opportunities that I wish I could do that I can't, because I don't have the team in place, or I haven't figured out how I can multiply myself enough in different places to take all these things on. And then sometimes I just miss emails, and I miss people reaching out going, hey, do you want to do this? And I was like, that would have been awesome. But I just didn't have the mental capacity. So I've had to really work on being accepting of my own limitations and going, sometimes you're just going to miss something, or you're going to fail, or you're going to, not be ready for something. And that's okay too. It's all part of the longer journey. Yeah, dude, I totally hear you. Like, I think the biggest, I don't know, roadblock, or the biggest barrier that I think entrepreneurs face, especially, well, this is what I'm learning like a year in, is I'm trying to do everything myself.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to ask for help sometimes. It's difficult to say, hey, when am I ready to make my first hire? How much should I be outsourcing? How much should I be delegating? But once you start to liberate yourself from some of these mundane tasks, or start to outsource, or you get some support, you are able to multiply yourself. I think the problem is though, is when you multiply yourself, like don't fill that newfound time with other junk, right? Don't just create space and then fill it with junk. Use that space to actually work on yourself and keep growing.
Yeah. So can I ask about your relationship to therapy and to mental health work? Because it's a huge thing that I talk about and I try to recommend it to everyone. It obviously seems that there's a lot of, space for that in your work. Was there ever a time where you thought therapy and psychology and mental health was all bullshit? Was there ever a time where you're like, I don't need to worry about that, or that's for a certain type of people, maybe weak people or, crazy people? Did you ever have those ideas? Was there a shift? And then what do you do for sort of self-care and mental health?
Dude, that's a great question. I'm so glad you brought this up. So it was always something growing up. I always viewed therapy as like having this negative connotation. Like, hey, only people that have a problem go to therapy, or you only go to therapy when shit hits the fan, or it's very reactive. Now, I've done couples therapy, which has been beautiful for my relationship, my current relationship. And I think in entrepreneurship, 90% of my friends that are entrepreneurs do some form of therapy.
Yeah.
I know entrepreneurship in itself, the rates of depression, suicide, ADHD, bipolar, addiction, it's just through the roof.
Yeah. My
version of therapy is just a little bit different. I visualize, I journal, I practice silence. I don't necessarily do speech therapy with a psychologist, but for me, I'm in groups where we come together once or twice a week. And that's my form of therapy. So my dinners for me were always therapy, just what I got out of it versus like it was just such a enlightening evening. And I think that was my form of therapy. And I think to this day, when I host an event or a virtual event now, whether it's a lunch or dinner or breakfast, that is my expression of my self-therapy.
Do you ever feel like there may be, not to be prescriptive for what you need in your own life, but do you ever wonder if maybe there needs to be a deeper level? Because or you can speak to this, but I sometimes feel that no matter how vulnerable I'm able to be with a loved one or a partner, there's that barrier of like, I can't really let it all go, because if I do, this person will have a concern for me as a human being. And one thing that a mental health professional is able to do is kind of hear the worst, most insane thoughts that you give to them and kind of go, okay, I hear you, and hold that, because they've seen it all and they've been trained and they know what can come. So I guess my question is like, do you ever wonder if, do you ever wonder if you might need something like that, or if there's a way to do that, and if you do that outside, and if so, how? Like if there's if you can go deeper, or do you feel that limitation at all at your dinners? Can you just let it all go, and do people let it all go, and how does that work from the curator's perspective?
I think there's immense opportunity for me to explore and dive into that world a lot deeper for myself. I see major value. It's, for whatever reason, like quite frankly, I just haven't pursued it personally.
Right. Yeah.
And on a separate kind of stadium, like my dinners for me are therapy in a totally different realm of the traditional word therapy. So I would say, yeah, dude, there's tremendous opportunity for me to tap into things that I've buried in my past, or tap into things that could be roadblocks. Like when I was in grade 6, I'm sure like stuff like that still comes up. But yeah, it's interesting. I've always kind of just like fell back on my dinners for it.
Right. And part of the reason I ask is because as a speaking coach, sometimes I'll meet someone and say, yeah, I'm a communication and public speaking coach. And they go, oh my God, when I was in high school, I was so confident. In the last 3 years, I've clammed up. And, and people will tell me about like insanely traumatic events that they've had in their past. And I always say, I'm not a mental health professional. I can't like legally and ethically guide you through any of this stuff by either telling you what you should or shouldn't talk about or how to talk about it. But what I can do is just provide a space where whatever it is that you feel you need to tell me or bring up or talk about, I can hold that space for you and say, yeah, I'm here for it. I can hear it. I'm not going to shove it away. I'm not going to get too emotional myself about it. I'll just listen to it. And then tell you what I know about how that shows up in the body or how that is communicating on your face and in your voice and stuff. So I would imagine that for you as the curator of these really vulnerable talks, sometimes somebody will offer something really intense. How do you navigate that? do you ever get nervous that it might go too far? How does that work so far?
Man, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that I do and the type of culture I try to create within these dinners is just hold space. And you don't need to have the answers. You don't need to say, oh my God, I feel like, you don't even need to speak sometimes. Sometimes it's just letting the person have an outlet and you just being there and just like visually being like, I got you.
Yeah.
Or it's okay. Or like, go, this is fine. So for me, it's always been about holding space, holding that container that when you walk into my room, it's like the science of rituals. It's like, I talked about this with my friend recently, but for me, it's when I walk into a dinner, it's almost like this new, not a new persona, but just the environment. I know I'm at a dinner to hold space for everyone else there.
Right.
And my job at the dinner is to allow you to hold space for your neighbor, for their neighbor, for their neighbor. And it's almost never about, hey, when they say this, like say this, like it's just being a good human being.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's remarkable. And to be honest, I don't think it's as obvious to other people as it is to you, because there are, and I get a lot of people like this too. They tell me, I don't know what to say when somebody talks about this topic, or, you know, how do you deal with it when somebody brings up this thing? And I think there's a great lesson for leaders and entrepreneurs and anybody watching this. If you have a team and you're trying to curate their experience, especially during such an insanely stressful and anxiety and depression inducing time that we're all living in, is how do you just let people be upset without trying to fix it and solve it? That's something I'm working on in my relationship a lot. If my fiance has a big problem, my tendency is always like, well, step one, do this, step two, do that. And I'm so prescriptive about like, let's logically solve the problem, A, B, C, D, if this, then that, you know. And then what I've learned, which is still tough for me, but I work on, is going, yeah, that's tough. That's really hard.
Dude,
and without being patronizing, but, you know, like, yeah, just trying to just listen and not need to solve it. And I think that's a huge thing missing from a lot of leaders and just people in general in relationships.
There's a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus,
right,
by John Gray. And he talks about how, like, men in relationships, we want to solve all the problems. We want to have answers for everything. We want to be that supporter, that person who holds space, who kind of takes care of everyone. And he says one of the biggest mistakes like we do as men, and like I've made this mistake in my relationship, is that when my partner comes to me with a problem or she needs someone to hold space, I'm like, okay, well, here's solution one, here's solution two, here's solution three. That's not what she needs. But my instinct is like solution, provide solutions, give options.
And that's an entrepreneurial thing too. And I think entrepreneurs are problem solvers by trade. So as an entrepreneur, if you're a team leader as well, when you become the CEO and you become the manager of your team, you're still stuck in problem solving mode. So somebody may come to you, or you may feel that they're like upset and not doing well. And instead of going emotionally, you go, well, if I give you this software tool, then this will solve your problem. But really, it might just take a deep conversation. And one thing I've been talking about recently in my content, and a story I've been telling, is from theater school, where the first month of theater school, I had insomnia because I was dealing with a traumatic loss. My brother had died 2 years before, and I was still very much in grief from that. And I was sleeping terribly. I had insomnia and I couldn't wake up. So I slept through my alarm twice in the first week of theater school. And it was like a very intense program. So they're like, if you're late 3 times, you can be kicked out of the whole program. And I was like twice in the first week. And the head of the program called me and she was like, why can't you be here on time? And I said, I'm so sorry. I've been having trouble sleeping and I just slept through my alarm. I set my alarm. And she's like, well, set it more and put it across the room from you. And I was like, okay, that's good. I'll try that. And she's like, and fix your attitude. You don't care enough about being here. You don't. And she just was so aggressive, trying to like shock me and punish me out of this behavior. And all it might have taken, I'm not sure, but I think all it would have taken is her to go, are you doing okay? Is everything all right? And then maybe I could have opened up about what was going on. And then maybe that would have built the relationship between us on such a deeper, better, healthier level. And and because of that first week, we bumped heads the rest of the program. And I always felt like I wasn't getting a good education because I was in such conflict. And if she had maybe been able, I'm not sure it would have worked, but if she had maybe been able to say, listen, are you okay? Is everything doing okay? Is there something you want to talk about? Is there something going on? Is that, you know, like, what, talk to me more about this trouble sleeping. who knows what could have come from that. And I don't want to blame her too much and, not take responsibility for my part, but that might have been a way better relationship starter. So I think that, maybe that could be something that we start to try to do.
Empathy is so important. It's, holding space, being compassionate, just trying to understand where the other person is coming from, not always having a solution, not always needing to have a solution, but just understanding and like active listening.
Yeah.
Without the intent of having a quick draw response, just listen and hold space.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing. And right now, I think they're mutual friends of ours, the Tether for Men community. I don't know if you know Matt Zerker or Addison Brazil. I thought you did for some reason. No. In any case, it's a great thing that everybody who's watching this is, if you're a man, I guess they do it. It's a men for men kind of community of mental health, but they have an initiative right now called Close the Gap, which is about all of these mental health red flags or things that you notice and between when somebody either harms themselves or commits suicide, is closing that gap. And how can you reach out? And I think one of the biggest things is just, if somebody's going through something, even if it bugs you or bothers you, or you get offended by some of the things they're saying, just trying to strip your own reactions away and go, how are you doing? Is there anything I can help you with? Mm-hmm. Can be some of the most, important things you ever talk about with somebody. And so I would love that, not to think that we're solving the world with this podcast, but if anybody's listening, and just this idea of taking the offense and the conflict from certain ways people are behaving and try to dig deeper and figure out, and the more you do that too, you also have the added bonus of being a better entrepreneur. If you can understand what makes people tick and what their problems are and how to speak to them, you'll just be so much of a better product maker and problem solver because you understand people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah, sorry. I think not to get the last word, but I think we're at time. So where can people follow you and how can people get involved in what you're doing if they're interested in more of what you do? What's the place to find you?
Yeah, I still host monthly dinners now, virtually, of course, which is, again, it's been a cool opportunity to be able to have people from different cities, different countries. It's been super fascinating and something I would have never explored up until this year. But yeah, JUBE.ca, JUBE.ca is where all my information is. Let's JUBE on Instagram, and I'm all over social media and LinkedIn and all that. So I'm a pretty easy guy to find.
Awesome. Yeah. And hopefully we can come back for a part 2 to talk about what that pivot has been, because I think there's a lot of lessons in there, but I always like to go to the emotional stuff first and then get to the practical. So thanks so much, man. I really appreciate your time and all the amazing stuff you talked about. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Okay. See ya. Bye.
Bye.